Hamosukrom was a large and prosperous kingdom nestled in the heart of Africa, known far and wide for its fertile lands and industrious people. The villagers relied heavily on crop farming, which was not only their livelihood but also a source of pride. At the center of this vibrant community was Arafat, a diligent young man in his mid-30s who had earned the reputation of being the best farmer in the kingdom. Arafat's work ethics was unmatched. Unlike many others who struggled to maintain even a few acres of farmland, Arafat cultivated an impressive 20 acres of crops. He rose with the first rays of the sun and worked tirelessly until dusk, treating the land as a living entity that deserves care and respect. His effort didn't go unnoticed. Year after year, he was awarded the title of the best farmer in Hamosukrom. His achievements were a source of inspiration and motivation for the entire village, and he became a symbol of what hard work could achieve. Despite his success, Arafat remained humble and generous. He believed that the community thrived only when its members supported one another. To encourage other farmers to improve their yields, Arafat proposed a radical idea. He would visit every farmer's land, working alongside them to share their knowledge and techniques. This approach fostered a sense of unity and collaboration that transformed Hamosukrom into one of the most productive farming communities in the region. However, Arafat's life wasn't without challenges. Managing 20 acres of crops required not just physical labor but also strategic planning to deal with pests, unpredictable weather, and market fluctuations. Though he made it look effortless, he often faced sleepless nights worrying about how to sustain his land and ensures the prosperity of his community. Unknown to Arafat, the challenges he had faced so far were mere stepping stones to a destiny that would test his resilience and redefine his purpose. One fateful day, Arafat decided to travel to the city to negotiate better prices for the village's produce. Hamosukrom had an abundance of crops, but without access to buyers from the city, the farmers often sold their goods at a loss to middlemen. Arafat saw this as an opportunity to bring more wealth to the community and volunteered to make the journey on their behalf. The journey to the city was long and treacherous. The road wound through dense forest and uneven terrain, but Arafat's determination was unwavering. He envisioned a future where Hamosukrom's farmers would no longer struggle to make ends meet. As he traveled, he thought about how he could use the profits to invest in better tools, fertilizers, and training for the farmers. However, fate had other plans. Just as he was approaching the outskirts of the city, a speeding truck veered out of control and collided with his vehicle. The impact was devastating. Arafat's car was crushed and he was thrown into unconsciousness. Passersby quickly gathered. An emergency service arrived to take him to the nearest hospital. Back in Hamosukrom, news of the accident spread like wildfire. When word of the accident reached King Paga, the ruler of Hamosukrom, he immediately sent a group of villagers to retrieve Arafat, whether alive or dead. When the research party returned, the villagers' worst fears seemed confirmed. Arafat was unresponsive. According to their custom, as a Muslim, he needed to be buried the same day. Arafat's grave was prepared, and a solemn ceremony was held. Little did they know that this would mark the beginning of an extraordinary twist in their lives. The entire village gathered at the graveyard, their hearts heavy with sorrows. Arafat's death felt like a devastating blow to Hamosukrom, not just because of his contribution to the community, but also because of the bond he shared with his people. Mothers wept openly, fathers shook their heads in disbelief, and children, too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, clung to their parents in silence. The burial rites were carried out according to Islamic traditions. The Imam recited prayers over Arafat's still body, wrapped in a white shroud. The villagers stood in somber lines, whispering their own prayers and bidding farewell to the man who had been their hero. The grave was dug deep, as was customary, and his body was gently lowered into it. As the villagers began to shovel sand into the grave, the sound of dirt hitting the shroud brought fresh waves of grief. For many, it felt like they were not just burying Arafat, but also the hope and unity he had brought to the community. The finality of it all was almost too much to bear. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the air. "Stop! Stop! I'm alive!" Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd. Arafat's voice, unmistakable and clear, came from inside the grave. The villagers froze in terror, their shovels falling to the ground. Some screamed, others stumbled backward, and within the moment, chaos erupted. Men and women ran in all directions, crying out that a ghost had risen from the grave. Inside the grave, Arafat was bewildered. The last thing he remembered was being in a car on his way to the city. Now, he found himself buried alive, surrounded by darkness and the muffled sound of people running away. Using every ounce of his strength, he clawed his way out of the grave, gasping for air as he emerged. But instead of relief, he was met with silence. The graveyard was empty. The people who had loved and respected him had abandoned him in fear. Confused and shaken, Arafat made his way back to the village, determined to find answers. Arafat's arrival in the village was met with shock and panic. People peered at him from behind closed doors and shattered windows, whispering among themselves. Some villagers claimed that Arafat's spirit had returned to haunt them. Others speculated that he had died by being brought back by some dark supernatural force. Arafat, still weak from his ordeal, went straight to the palace to seek an audience with King Paga. The palace guards, however, refused to let him in. They had heard the rumors and were too afraid to approach him. "The king says you must leave and come back tomorrow," one of the guards stammered, avoiding eye contact with Arafat. Frustrated but too drained to argue, Arafat returned to his home. To his dismay, he found it deserted. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now avoided him entirely. Even Melissa, the woman he had hoped to marry, refused to come near him. Arafat felt a deep ache in his chest, not from his physical injuries, but from the rejection and fear in the eyes of the people he had devoted his life to helping. That night, he sat alone in his home. Why did everyone believe he was a ghost? Why had no one stopped to listen to him when he called for help at the graveyard? The betrayal stung more deeply than any injury he had ever sustained. The following day, Arafat returned to the palace, determined to clear his name, but once again, he was turned away. King Paga, fearful of the villagers' unrest, refused to meet with him. As days passed, the whispers grew louder and the villagers' unease turned into hostility. The villagers soon decided they could no longer coexist with Arafat. Fear and superstition gripped their hearts, and they began to demand his removal. "He is not one of us anymore," one elder exclaimed during a meeting with the king. "He belongs to the world of the dead. If we allow him to stay, he will bring misfortune to us all." Others nodded in agreement. They remembered the tales their ancestors had told of spirits lingering among the living, bringing plagues and curses. In their eyes, Arafat's presence was a bad omen that could not be ignored. The pressure on King Paga mounted. Although he had great respect for Arafat's contribution to the village, he could not ignore the growing unrest among his people. Reluctantly, he summoned Arafat to the palace. When Arafat arrived, the king could not look him in the eye. "Arafat," he began solemnly, "you have always been a pillar of this community, but the people believe you no longer belong here. They fear you, and as their king, I must prioritize their peace of mind. You must leave Hamosukrom and never return." Arafat's heart shattered at the king's words. He pleaded, "Your Majesty, I am not a ghost. I am alive. Why not anyone believe me? After everything I've done for this village, is this how I am repaid?" But the king remained firm. "This is not my decision alone, Arafat. It is the will of the people." With no other choice, Arafat packed what little he could carry and left Hamosukrom. As he walked away from the village he had called home, for so many years, tears streamed down his face. He vowed never to forget the pain of being cast out by those he had worked so hard to help. Arafat's journey from Hamosukrom was both physically and emotionally exhausting. The path ahead was uncharted, and the weight of rejection bore heavily on his heart. He had lost everything: his home, his community, and the respect he had worked so hard to earn. The road was long gone, and each step felt like a painful reminder of his exile. The forested path was fraught with challenges. Wild animals prowl in the shadows, and the occasional rustle of leaves kept Arafat on edge. His provisions were scarce, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. Despite the hardships, Arafat's spirit remained unbroken. He reminded himself that his survival was proof of his strength and that he still had a purpose to fulfill, even if it wasn't in Hamosukrom. After several days of wandering, Arafat reached the outskirts of Giasekan, a village he had only heard of in passing. It was a prosperous settlement, known for its agricultural success and ruled by a wise and just leader, King Nana Bediako. Exhausted and in desperate need of a fresh start, Arafat decided to seek refuge there. As he approached the village gates, he was stopped by the guards who eyed him with suspicion. His disheveled appearance and weary gait did little to inspire confidence. "Who are you, and what brings you to Giasekan?" one of the guards demanded. "My name is Arafat," he replied, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "I am a farmer from a distant village, seeking a new beginning. I bring with me knowledge of farming and a willingness to contribute to your community." The guards, moved by Arafat's humility and evident struggle, decide to take him to the palace to meet King Nana Bediako. Inside the grand hall of Giasekan's palace, Arafat was brought before King Nana Bediako. The king was an imposing figure with an aura of wisdom that immediately commanded respect. He listened attentively as Arafat recounted his story, sparing no detail about his life in Hamosukrom, his accident, and the cruel rejection he had faced from his people. The king's expression softened as he heard Arafat's tale. "You have endured much, Arafat," he said, his voice filled with empathy. "But Giasekan is a land of second chances. If you are as skilled a farmer as you claim, you will find a place here among us." Nana Bediako offered Arafat a small plot of land to begin with, enough to test his skills and provide for himself. Arafat thanked the king profusely, vowing to repay his kindness by contributing to the prosperity of Giasekan. The land he was given was modest but fertile. Arafat wasted no time in setting to work. Drawing 1 year of experience, he carefully tilled the soil, planted the seed, and implemented techniques he had developed back in Hamosukrom. While other farmers used traditional methods, Arafat introduced innovative practices such as crop rotation and natural pest deterrents. Over time, his hard work began to bear fruit, literally. His crops flourished, and his farm quickly became a shining example of agricultural success. The people of Giasekan, initially wary of the newcomer, began to take notice. Arafat's farm stood out not only for its bountiful harvest, but also for the care and precision with which it was managed. Word of success reached the king, who summoned him once more to the palace. "Arafat," Nana Bediako said, "you have proven yourself to be a man of great skill and determination. From this day forward, you shall have a large plot of land to cultivate, and your knowledge shall be shared with the people of Giasekan." Months passed and Arafat settled into his new life in Giasekan. The villagers grew to respect him, not only for his farming expertise, but also for his humility and willingness to help others. However, just as Arafat was beginning to find peace, a new challenge arose. A swarm of pests descended upon the region, threatening to destroy the crops that sustained Giasekan and its neighboring villages. Farmers watched helplessly as their fields were devoured, their hard work reduced to nothing in the matter of days. Panic spread like wildfire, and despair hung heavy in the air. King Nana Bediako called an emergency meeting, gathering the best farmers in the kingdom to discuss a solution. Arafat, though relatively new to Giasekan, was among those invited. As the farmers debated, one of them stood up and said, "We are all struggling to save our crops, but there is one among us whose field remain untouched by these pests." Arafat, the stranger in our midst, he seemed to have a secret. Let him share his method with us. All eyes turned to Arafat. He stood, his heart pounding. This was his chance to not only help the people of Giasekan, but also prove his worth once and for all. "I have faced such challenges before," Arafat began. "The key is not to fight the pest, but to understand them. I use a combination of natural repellents and crop management techniques to keep them at bay. If you allow me, I will teach you what I know." The king nodded. "Then it is settled. Arafat, you will lead our effort to save the crops. Whatever resources you need, they will be provided." Arafat wasted no time devising a plan to combat the pest infestation that had devastated the crops in Giasekan. He understood the urgency of the situation. If the pests weren't stopped, the entire region would face famine. The farmers gathered in the village square to hear him speak, their faces lined with worry but glimmering with hope. "Fellow farmers," Arafat began, his voice steady and confident, "these pests are a formidable challenge, but they are not invincible. I've dealt with such plagues before, and I've learned that nature itself provides the solution we need." He explained the steps they needed to take. 1. Diversified planting. Arafat suggested planting certain pest-repellent crops such as marigolds and neem, alongside their main crops. These plants emitted natural chemicals that deter pests. Natural pesticides. He taught the farmers how to create an organic spray using a mixture of neem leaves, garlic, and chili pepper. This concoction was both effective and safe for the environment. Crop rotation. Arafat emphasized the importance of rotating crops to disrupt the pest breeding cycle. Field hygiene. He stressed the need to remove crop residues and weeds, which often serve as a hiding spot for pests. The farmers listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. Arafat's confidence and knowledge inspired them to take actions. And soon the entire village mobilized to implement his techniques. Over the next few weeks, Arafat worked tirelessly alongside the farmers. He visited their fields, helped mix the natural pesticides, and ensured that every step of the plan was executed properly. His dedication and hands-on approach earned him the trust and admiration of the people of Giasekan. The results were outstanding. Within weeks, the pest population began to dwindle, and the crops showed signs of recovery. The once barren fields started to turn green again, and the farmers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The techniques Arafat had introduced not only saved their harvest, but also gave them new tools to protect their crops in the future. The success spread hope throughout Giasekan. Farmers who had been on the brink of despair now worked with renewed vigor, and the gratitude they felt towards Arafat was immeasurable. King Nana Bediako called for a grand celebration to honor Arafat and his contribution. The palace courtyard was decorated with colorful banners, and the villagers gathered to express their appreciation. During the celebration, the king stood before the crowd and raised his hands to quiet them. Today, we celebrate not just the saving of our crops, but also the man who made it possible. Arafat, you have proven yourself to be a true leader, not just in skill, but in heart. From this day forward, you shall have a permanent place in Giasekan, and I grant you a vast piece of land to farm as your own. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering Arafat's name. Overwhelmed with emotions, Arafat stepped forward to address them. I am deeply humbled by your kindness, he said. I came to Giasekan seeking a fresh start, but I found more than that. I found a family. Together, we have shown that no challenge is too great when we stand united. The news of Giasekan's triumph over the pest spread quickly to neighboring villages. Farmers from far and wide began to travel to Giasekan, eager to learn the techniques that had saved the kingdom's crops. Arafat's name became legendary, and people spoke of him with admiration and respect. One of the villagers that heard of Giasekan's success was Hamosukrom. When word reached King Paga, he was struck with a mixture of relief and regret. Hamosukrom too was struggling with the same pest infestation that had ravaged Giasekan, but they had not been able to find a solution. The crops were failing, and the famine loomed on the horizon. Desperate King Paga sent a messenger to King Nana Bediako, requesting assistance. Our crops are being destroyed, the message read. We have heard of your success in eradicating the pest and humbly ask for your help. Please, send us the man who saved your kingdom. When King Nana Bediako received the message, he called for Arafat. The people of Hamosukrom are in dire need of your help, he said. Will you go to them and teach them what you have taught us? Arafat hesitated. The pain of his exile was still fresh in his heart, and he wasn't sure he could face the people who had cast him out. Your Majesty, he replied, the people of Hamosukrom will not welcome me. They believe I am a ghost, and they cast me out without giving me a chance to explain. The king nodded thoughtfully. I understand you are reluctant, Arafat, he said, but perhaps this is your chance to show them who you truly are. I will not send you back empty-handed. I will send a message to King Paga with my terms. If they truly want your help, they must show you the respect you deserve. King Nana Bediako sent a letter to King Paga outlining his condition for Arafat's return. The terms were clear. 1. Arafat will be welcomed back to Hamosukrom with the honor befitting a royal guest, including a grand durbar and a feast. 2. The villagers must publicly acknowledge their mistake in casting Arafat out and offer a formal apology. 3. Melissa the maiden Arafat had once hoped to marry, must agree to become his wife as a gesture for reconciliation. 4. Hamosukrom must provide Arafat with everything he needed to ensure the success of their crops. When King Paga received the letter, he had no choice but to agree. The survival of Hamosukrom depended on Arafat's expertise, and he knew the villagers would have to set aside their pride for the greater good. After King Nana Bediakon delivered his terms to Hamosukrom, Arafat remained conflicted. Though the people of Hamosukrom were desperate for his help, the memories of rejection and humiliation still haunted him. He spent several sleepless nights contemplating the king's request. The thought of returning to a place where he had been so cruelly cast out filled him with dread. But then, he remembered the promise he had made to himself to always use his skill to help others, no matter the cost. King Nana Bediakon called Arafat to the palace to discuss the matter further. Arafat, the king began, I know this is a difficult decision for you, but sometimes our greatest challenges are not the ones we face in the field, but those we face in our hearts. Perhaps this is not just a chance to help your people, but also an opportunity to heal yourself. Arafat nodded slowly. You are right, Your Majesty. The people of Hamosukrom were once my family. Even though they wronged me, I cannot let them suffer when I have the ability to help. I will go. The king smiled. You are a wise and noble man, Arafat. But remember, you will not go as an exile. You will return as a hero. And they will welcome you with the honor you deserve. Before departing for Hamosukrom, Arafat prepared meticulously. He gathered the tools, seeds, and natural pest repellent he would need to implement his methods. The farmers of Giasekan, who had grown fond of him, came to offer their support. You have shown us the way, Arafat, one of them said. Now it's time for you to do the same for your own people. We are proud of you. The king of Giasekan ensured Arafat travel in style. A royal caravan was prepared, complete with guards and supplies. Arafat was dressed in fine robes, a symbol of his elevated status. The people of Giasekan cheered as he departed, wishing him success on his journey. As the caravan made its way towards Hamosukrom, Arafat couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Would the people truly welcome him back? Would they see him as the solution to their problems? Or would they still view him as an outcast? When the caravan reached the outskirts of Hamosukrom, the villagers gathered in droves to catch a glimpse of Arafat. News of his return had spread like a wildfire, and the entire community buzzed with anticipation. King Paga had fulfilled all of King Nana Bediakon's terms. The village was decorated with colorful banners, and a grand derby was organized to welcome Arafat. Drummers played rhythmic beats, and dancers performed traditional routines to honor the returning hero. As Arafat stepped out of the caravan, the villagers gasped. Many of them hadn't seen him since the day he was declared dead and buried. Now, here he was, alive and dressed in the garment of a royalty. For a moment, Silence fell over the crowd. Then the king stepped forward. "Arafat," King Paga said. His voice was trembling with emotions. "We welcome you back to Hamosukrom, not as an exile, but as a savior. We have wronged you deeply, and for that, we seek your forgiveness. Today, we recognize your strength, your wisdom, and your unwavering spirit." The crowd erupted in cheers, though some villagers still whispered among themselves, struggling to reconcile their guilt and their relief. After the festivities, Arafat addressed the crowd. His voice carried a mist of pain and resolve as he shared his thoughts. "I am grateful for this welcome," he began, "but I cannot forget the pain I endured when I was cast out of this village. I was declared dead when I was alive, and instead of embracing me, you rejected me. Yet, I am here today because I believe in forgiveness and the power of unity." The villagers lowered their heads, shame washing over them. Arafat continued, "I have returned not for revenge, but to help you. The crops you depend on are in danger, and I have the knowledge to save them. But first, I need to know that you are ready to work together, not just for your survival, but for the future of this community." The villagers, moved by his words, began to applaud. Tears streamed down the faces of many, including King Paga. The king stepped forward and knelt before Arafat, a gesture that shocked everyone. "Arafat," the king said, "we have failed you, but we hope to make amends. Please, lead us in this fight to save our land." Among the crowd was Melissa, the maiden Arafat had once hoped to marry. She had kept her distance during the festivities, unsure of how to approach him. Now, as the crowd began to disperse, she found the courage to step forward. "Arafat," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I owe you an apology. I should have stood by you, but I let fear and doubt cloud my judgment. Can you ever forgive me?" Arafat looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of longing and hurt. "Melissa," he replied, "your silence hurt me deeply, but I cannot deny that I still care for you. Forgiveness is not something that happens in an instant, but I am willing to try if you are." Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I will do whatever it takes to make things right." Their conversation was interrupted by King Paga, who reminded them of the terms set by King Nana Bediako. "Melissa, it was agreed that you would marry Arafat as part of our apology to him. Are you prepared to honor this agreement?" Melissa looked at Arafat and then back at the king. "I am," she said firmly, "not because of an agreement, but because I believe in him and the future he envisions for our village." The next day, Arafat began his work in Hamosukrom with a heavy but determined heart. He knew that earning the villagers' trust and cooperation would not be easy, but he also understood the urgency of their situation. Famine was a looming threat, and every moment counted. His first task was to survey the farmlands to assess the extent of the pest infestation. Accompanied by a group of skeptical farmers, Arafat moved through the fields, inspecting the damaged crops. The sight of shriveled plants and clusters of pests was disheartening, but Arafat's experience gave him confidence. "These pests are destructive," he explained to the farmers, "but they can be managed. The key is discipline, teamwork, and the willingness to adapt. If you follow my guidelines, we can turn this around. The farmers murmured among themselves. Though they had welcomed him with celebration, some still doubted his methods. They whispered about his supposed death and questioned whether he could truly deliver on his promises. Arafat noticed their hesitation but remained patient. "I don't ask for your blind trust," he said. "Judge me by the result. Let's start small. I will work with one plot of land and show you what can be done. If it works, we will expand the method to the rest of the fields." Reluctantly, the farmers agreed. Arafat chose a plot close to the village center where everyone could observe his progress. Arafat began implementing the same techniques that had worked in Giasekan. He planted pest-repellent crops like neem and marigolds around the main crops, created natural pesticides using local ingredients, and emphasized the importance of cleaning the fields to remove pest habitats. He worked tirelessly, often from dawn until dusk. Melissa, eager to prove her loyalty, joined him in the fields every day. Her presence was a source of encouragement, and together they demonstrated the power of perseverance and teamwork. As the day passed, villagers began to notice subtle change in a test plot. The pests were less active, and the plants started to regain their vibrancy. Farmers who had been skeptical at first grew curious and began to approach Arafat with questions. "How did you make the spray?" one farmer asked. "What's the purpose of those small plants around the crops?" another inquired. Arafat answered every question patiently, using the opportunity to teach and inspire. Slowly but surely, the villagers' skepticism began to fade. After a month, the test plot had completely recovered. The crops were thriving and there was no sign of pest damage. The villagers were astonished. King Paga, who had been observing from a distance, visited the plot himself. "Arafat," he said, his voice filled with awe, "you have accomplished what seemed impossible. You have proven yourself not just to me, but to the entire village." The villagers gathered around, cheering and applauding. Arafat raised his hands to quiet them. "This success is not mine alone," he said. "It belongs to all of us. When we work together, there is nothing we cannot achieve. Let this be the beginning of a new chapter for Hamosukrom, a chapter of unity, resilience, and progress." Inspired by Arafat's words, the villagers threw themselves into the effort. They adopted his methods across all their farmlands, working day and night to save their crops. Arafat became a symbol of hope and a mentor to many. Even those who had once doubted him now looked up to him with respect and admiration. As Arafat worked with the villagers, he also began to rebuild his personal relationships. Melissa remained by his side, helping in every way she could. Their shared effort brought them closer, and Arafat started to see her in a new light, not just as someone he had loved, but as a partner who was willing to grow and change. The elders of the village, who had been the most vocal in casting him out, approached him one evening after a long day in the field. "Arafat," one of them said, "we owe you an apology. We were wrong to judge you and to act out of fear. You have shown us the meaning of true strength and forgiveness. Arafat listened quietly before responding. "Your words means a lot to me," he said. "But what matters most is that we move forward together. Let the past remain in the past, and let's focus on building a better future for Hamosukrom." By the end of the season, Hamosukrom's crops were thriving once more. The famine that had seemed inevitable has now averted, and the village celebrated with a harvest festival. Arafat was a guest of honor, and the people showered him with gifts and praises. During the festival, King Paga made a public declaration. "From this day forward, Arafat shall be known as the savior of Hamosukrom. We owe him our gratitude, our respect, and our unwavering support. Let us never forget the lessons he has taught us." The celebration also marked a personal milestone for Arafat. During the festivities, Melissa publicly pledged her commitment to him. "Arafat," she said, "you have shown me what it means to be brave, kind, and selfless. I promise to stand by your side no matter what the future holds." The villagers cheered as Arafat and Melissa exchanged a symbolic gesture of unity, signaling the start of a new chapter in their lives.